Now we continue our discussion of CDBG Public Infrastructure Guidebook topics with some eligibility thresholds. The first of these is the documentation of the application's threat to health and safety. You will need to address within the application what is a threat to health and safety posed by the current conditions on the ground in the applicant community. The degree to which the current conditions locally affect the public's health and safety, and the severity and immediacy of that problem. You will also discuss in writing and document whether the proposed activities are necessary to comply with state or federal regulations. And when I'm giving this overview, it's basically you're going to provide the narrative that in the project summary of the application, and then you're going to document it with hard data documentation. So you really want them to mesh. If you're going to say something in the project summary, please back it up with actual documentation. Because if not, it can confuse each of the two application reviewers, and it can cause you to lose points that otherwise might be well in hand. As it says, the department reserves the right not to complete an application review and deny funding based on this application threshold when the health, the threat, and safety has not been adequately documented. For health and safety purposes, that also applies to each non-contiguous project area in the application. Each one on its own must meet the health and safety threshold or risk denial for funding of the project area, or plural areas, and or the entire application. So if you're doing, say, sewer, or proposing sewer relining in two separate areas of town, you need to document individually that each area has collapsed sewers or root infiltration or soil infiltration, etc. Or you run the risk that we'll either eliminate one of those two areas for funding or the entire application. And that did happen in this previous round that we reviewed, where someone had documentation, an IEPA enforcement order from 10 years ago, and most of the work had already been done in the community with previous CDBG grants and IEPA funding. And the one area they were proposing, none of the camera photos from 10 to 15 years before had been taken within the area proposed for funding. So if you're including camera photos of sewers, for example, make sure that you have some camera photos from the project area being proposed for work in the current application. A serious threat to health and safety is defined as a deficiency in the community public facility, or the community lacks the facility entirely, and include problems clearly attributable to the deficiency have occurred, such as serious illness, disease, outbreak, or serious environmental pollution. Think of raw sewage going into a stream, that other communities are going to drink from downstream, or into the Illinois River, where it's going to affect wildlife and other communities' drinking water supplies, or even the applicant community's drinking water supply. And the problem is present, continual, and chronic. The documentation of the threat to health and safety must be no more than 2 years old. However, it may include older documentations only if documenting a continuing unresolved threat, and includes documentation of 2 years or old or less. For example, getting back to my favorite topic today of sewer relining, if you have camera photos that are, say, 10 to 20 years old, and, as an engineer who used to work with us explained, that problem will never resolve itself and usually will get worse. And we understand it costs community money to camera sewers. So if you have those old camera photos for your project area, and you include documentation such as current citizen complaint letters of sewage backing up in their basements, or sewer repair logs, were just got so bad the community had to resolve like spot repairs itself, or discovered during other construction that some of the sewers have collapsed. Well, that would be your current documentation linked to the greater than 2-year-old documentation. So that test would be met. I know this slide starts with the phrase to the greatest extent possible. However, I would say, please always include dates and addresses and locations with your health and safety documentation when verifying this threat. It makes life so much easier for the public infrastructure application reviewers, and it makes your job easier persuading us of the existence of a threat to health and safety as stated in your project summary, and just shows, it really documents the extent better to what's going on. Some examples of acceptable threat to health and safety documentation include water well tests, which would be, for customers that are getting their current water directly from their own wells or a communal well. And there's a minimal 25% sampling. Hydrant pressure tests showing that PSI is less than 20%. Photographs of the, of no matter what it is, whether it's the result of the threat to health and safety, say sewer backups into residents' basements. We had a couple of municipal water well applications this year where they cited extensively that the stainless steel well screen is pulling away. Include a photo of that. Drop, camera down the well and include photos of that. Because we can't see, we're just taking someone's word that that's occurring. But we need to see what is occurring. You'll have a log of boil orders to document water, frequent water main breaks. For surface water tests for inadequate sewers where, raw fecal matter, or for wells where raw fecal matter is in the groundwater or the surface water when it rains. IEPA or USAPA violation letters or orders, enforcement letters from the Attorney General or U.S. Attorney, court orders, court consent decrees. Those are all valid means of document health and safety. And if you have a court order or court consent decree, for the most part, it's going to score fairly high on the threat to health and safety. You can include newspaper articles showing, say, flooding in a given area, or describing, the problem in greater detail that's going on. Current resident complaint letters, again, make sure they sign it, make sure they have their name clearly legible, and that they have the address legible, and put the resident complaint letters on a map, to show us, where they're coming from. You would, same for water and sewer break logs, map them out and give a date to when that occurred. It is always key to remember the degree, the severity, and the immediacy of the problem are very crucial when identifying a threat to health and safety. The more you describe in the project summary, the more you document that issue, the better chances your application has for being scored and meeting this threshold. The documentation, again, should be no more than 2 years old. If it's older than 2 years old, you have to have bridging documentation to bring it into the current period. And while I have the chance, one last reminder on documenting the threshold of health and safety is to use dates and addresses and locations when possible for verification. It makes our job so much easier, and it makes your job of informing us so much better. And now we will move on to our next threshold. And that threshold is having a sufficient water or sewer rate to allow your project to be considered eligible for funding. From the 2019 round onwards, State CDBG PI application rules require a rate of 1% of area median household income for 5,000 gallons of water or 5,000 gallons of sewer. The water rate requirement applies to water projects, while the sewer rate requirement applies to sewer projects. Other projects have no rate requirement to apply for CDBG funding. Here's an example to demonstrate sufficient water and sewer rates. The city's median household income is $39,444, while its county's median household income is $40,841. We'll use the city MHI of $39,444. So using the formula of dividing that by 12 months and then taking that times 1%, that gives a rate of $32.87 for 5,000 gallons. If you use the sewer rate the community currently has of $13.80, the sewer rate is clearly insufficient, and that application would not meet the threshold. If the application is for a water project, well, this community would meet the threshold because its rate of $51.60 far exceeds the required 1% rate of $32.87. Fortunately for my presentation, that last threshold is very cut and dried. So basically, the community is either going to have a sufficient rate or not have a sufficient rate. And for those who may wonder if the project is for a storm sewer work or storm drainage improvements, there is no required rate for those types of applications, just for water projects and sewer projects for CDBG public infrastructure funding. Thank you very much.